Microaggressions, Impact on Staff and Patrons. Jedi training presented by the Mid-Hudson Library System. These self-paced trainings are meant to help library staff members discover more about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, not only in the workplace but the world at large. The questions asked throughout these trainings are meant for private reflection. For this training, we are using the definition for microaggression from the book This Book is Anti-Racist by Tiffany Jewell. A microaggression is an intentional or unintentional insult, slight, or hostile negative message to folks who do not fit into the imaginary box of dominant culture. They can occur anytime and anywhere. Sometimes microaggressions are spoken, like someone saying, "Where were you born?" to an Asian British person in London. Other times they are acted out, like crossing to the other side of the street when you see a black man, or a shop owner ignoring a brown person and only addressing the white customers. Microaggressions, no matter how small they may seem, are harmful. Microaggressions can occur any time between coworkers, staff, and patrons, or any two members of the public in the library building. Watch the following TED Talk where Tiffany Alvoyd not only illustrates what a microaggression can be, but provides some useful tools to help you avoid them. Let us watch the video.
The formal definition of a microaggression is listed behind me. Simply put, microaggressions are insults that are rooted in stereotype, and they're directed at someone because of their membership within a marginalized group. Now, because they are rooted in stereotype, they limit a person's ability to be able to see people as individuals. In 1970, Dr. Chester Middlebrook Pierce, a professor at Harvard, coined the term microaggressions to describe insults and dismissive behavior he witnessed Black people enduring. But now the term has been expanded to include offensive comments and behaviors that are directed at anyone in a marginalized group, including but not limited to women, people of color, people with disabilities, and people who are older. So, one of the things about microaggressions is that they're very prevalent in society, and I could do a full day's discussion about that. I actually developed a training that I share with companies to help them address offensive comments in their workplace. We're just going to go through a couple examples here today. But it's important to note that we all have biases, and anyone can be guilty of making a microaggression or being subjected to one. So why does it matter? Well, for some people, just being themselves can be a revolutionary act because their very being is crushing stereotypes of who and what they should be. Microaggressions wound people. If we were to compare it to getting a paper cut, one paper cut is manageable, but paper cuts all over your body is something quite different. And it's this accumulation of offensive comments in social settings and professional settings that begin to take a toll on a person's spirit. Microaggressions can be an amorphous concept, but it's my hope through the examples I'm going to provide for you that I can provide a more definitive understanding. Microaggressions regarding disability are prevalent. For example, making comments like, "I'm so OCD about my files," or, "Ugh, I can't read today, I'm so dyslexic," when someone does not actually have dyslexia or OCD, can be perceived as a microaggression. These phrases are examples of ableist language, and they trivialize something that is quite serious. For some historical context, I want to discuss what happened when the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed in 1990. The ADA makes it illegal in employment to discriminate against someone because of a mental or physical disability. It also guarantees access to buildings and to public and private transportation. Shortly before the act was passed, several disability activists came to DC and they climbed the 83 steps outside the Capitol building. They met at the base of the stairs and they got out of their wheelchairs, they took off their crutches and any kind of assistive walking devices, and they dragged or crawled themselves up all 83 steps. Now, I like to share this story because it's a good reminder about the historical exclusion that people with disabilities have had to face. And it's also a good reminder that there was a group of people that felt so disenfranchised, so marginalized, and so unseen that they felt the need to do this. Microaggressions regarding race are also very plentiful. Some people might be surprised to know that professing colorblindness can actually be a form of a microaggression. Examples would be, I don't see color. I was raised to treat everyone the same. I work in a diverse environment. I was in the Peace Corps. It's important to note, that is funny. It's important to note that mere proximity to people of color does not make someone woke. Nor does it make them automatically knowledgeable about social injustice issues. These comments actually deny the existence of people of color's experience in the world. And me personally, I've seen these phrases used in a defensive posture when someone's being challenged about something that they may have said that's offensive. What it actually does is shut down conversation, and it allows stereotypes to continue. The last microaggression that I want to talk about is the phrase, that's so ghetto, or that's ghetto. Now, Saturday Night Live has done a sketch about this phrase, and it's tossed around in the workplace and in professional settings, but this phrase can be very offensive to people, and I'm going to provide some historical context as to why. So the word ghetto is an Italian pronunciation. The word is used in 1516 to describe an area of the city where Jewish people are living in the city of Venice. Then in 1899, the word is being used to describe where minority groups are living in the city, and again, it tends to be a low-income area. From a US perspective, the word has been associated with Black and brown people who live in low-income areas. What we're essentially talking about is a place in the city where people are being regulated because of poverty, disenfranchisement, and reasons that point to systemic racism. Now, when I'm talking about systemic racism, what do I mean by that? Well, the GI Bill would be a good example. In 1944, President Roosevelt signed the first version of the GI Bill into law. And that bill essentially made it possible for veterans to go to college and also gave them the ability to get low-interest mortgages, which this sounds like a really good program, and it is. Unfortunately, the way it was administered, it was very discriminatory to Black veterans. The Veterans Administration refused to guarantee loans for developers who planned to sell homes to Black people. When I'm talking about systemic racism, I'm also talking about redlining. Redlining is the practice of drawing a circle around Black and brown neighborhoods and then refusing to give loans to those areas. What I'm also talking about is pushing and shuttling people into a specific area of the city and then setting up situations so that the property remains undervalued. When people use the phrase, that's ghetto or that's so ghetto, it's a way of making fun of someone or something. And for the reasons I just shared, it's not funny. So now that I've given you a couple examples of what a microaggression is, I want to give you a couple tools to avoid making these kind of comments in the workplace. The first tool or tip is pretty simple, is pause. Before you ask someone a personal question in the workplace, pause. Before you compare someone to something or to someone else, pause. Before describing someone's personality, pause. And when you're pausing, think to yourself, what could potentially be the impact on what I'm about to say to someone? Not just my intention, but what could be the possible impact that the way this person could take what I'm saying? Could they be possibly offended? The next thing I want to think about is this comment necessary? Is it promoting a growth mindset? Because remember, my number one priority when I'm at work is to be productive. The next thing that you can do to try to avoid making a microaggression is research. As I discussed in the previous example about that's so ghetto, a lot of American English is slang. So before adding a new word to your vocabulary, just do a quick Google search, just to make sure that what you're saying is not offensive. So before I leave here, this afternoon, what I want to leave with you with is, during the course of this conversation, I've been talking about inclusion and respect, which is important, and I hope that you leave this talk with that understanding. But I hope you also took from this talk the concepts of kindness and human decency. Thinking about something before I say it, that's a form of kindness. And treating people the way I want to be treated is one of the highest forms of kindness. Thank you.
Microaggressions can be organized into different types, as described in a tool titled Recognizing Microaggressions and the Messages They Send, created by the University of California. Over the next several slides, you will hear about fictionalized scenarios in which 3 different types of microaggressions take place in a library setting, the impact they might have on patrons' relationship with the library, and what we can do to avoid similar scenarios. You will see that the main lesson for avoiding microaggressions is slow down and examine your decisions with equity in mind. The first type of microaggression we will look at is criminality or assumption of criminal status. In this type of microaggression, a person of color is presumed to be dangerous, criminal, or deviant based on their apparent race. In this scenario, we meet 3 regular patrons: Ricardo, who appears to be Latinx, and Adele and Ben, who appear white. All 3 are leaving the library, which is about to close. As all 3 patrons are carrying their bags full of checked-out items, they pass the library staff member. Out of the 3, only Ricardo is stopped by the staff member and asked if he has checked out everything in his bag. This is considered a microaggression because in this scenario, even though all 3 are frequent and upstanding library patrons, only Ricardo is stopped. The message Ricardo receives is, "You look like someone who is trying to steal items from the library. You do not belong." How could this microaggression have been avoided? The microaggression occurred when the staff member automatically, possibly due to an implicit bias, concluded that Ricardo, but not Ben or Adele, was someone to be suspicious of for having unchecked out items. There is no other indication in our scenario that Ricardo exhibited any suspicious behavior or has ever removed items from the library without checking them out. In this instance, the staff member should have paused to consider why Ricardo is the only patron they wanted to stop. Why should Adele and Ben not be stopped as well? If the staff member determines that their concern was actually valid and was not just an assumption based on Ricardo's appearance, they should have discussed their suspicion with the supervisor or investigated further before approaching Ricardo and accusing him of breaking the rules. After this happened to Ricardo, he may feel less welcome in the library, like an outsider who will be judged for his apparent race. If he feels he and his family may be subjected to more unequitable treatment, he will not want to return or support the library. Adele and Ben might also have seen what took place and may also conclude that the library is not an equitable place and question if it deserves their patronage and support. The next type of microaggression we will look at is second-class citizen. This type of microaggression occurs when people of one group are treated as inferior to people of another more powerful or preferred group. Meet your patrons: Timothy, a high school student looking for help with an assignment, and Leonard, an older man in a suit looking for value line. Timothy comes up to the adult reference desk and patiently waits while the librarian working helps a patron over the phone. Then, Leonard comes up and stands next to Timothy to wait as well. The librarian was looking down and did not see who arrived first. But when the librarian finishes her call, she looks up and automatically turns to Leonard first, asking, "How may I help you, sir?" This is considered a microaggression because younger patrons are often seen as second-class citizens or less important patrons. The librarian assumed that because Timothy is just a teenager, his question could wait, without asking who was there first. Timothy is being sent the message that his time and his needs are less important than Leonard's. How could this microaggression have been avoided? Many of us can relate to having two patrons in front of us at the same time. This kind of microaggression arises when a staff member makes a judgment call on who deserves to be helped first, based on anything besides who arrived first. The librarian in this instance should have asked, "Who was here first?" If she concluded that Timothy's question would take some time, she might have asked him if he would mind waiting a moment, then addressed Leonard to determine if his question could be answered quickly. Even though in our scenario Leonard's question can be resolved quicker, the problem is that the librarian catered to Leonard's needs first without a moment's thought. Timothy may feel frustrated after this encounter and consider the library somewhere where help is difficult for young people to come by. He might tell his friends and parents about what happened, and they may not want to use or support the library either. Leonard may also feel uncomfortable. He might feel put on the spot, having to let the librarian know that actually he was not the person she should be helping first. The final type of microaggression we will look at is sexist or heterosexist language. These types of microaggressions involve behaviors, terms, or requirements that exclude, degrade, or put undue burden on female and LGBTQ+ patrons. In this scenario, your longtime patron Parker, who is transgender and has recently changed their name socially but not legally, approaches the public service desk and asks to have their library account changed to reflect their name. The staff member provides Parker with an application card to fill out and asks for the old card and an additional official form of ID, like a driver's license or bill reflecting the name Parker, as per library policy. This policy is considered a microaggression because in our scenario, Parker would need to provide a driver's license or some form of officially accepted ID showing their new name. In New York State, for a trans person to change their name and sex on their driver's license, they must first pay a fee to the DMV, then provide either proof of a sex change or doctor's note to the DMV. Finally, for the name change itself, the DMV would require a court order certifying the name change. The New York State Supreme and County Court name change fee at the time of the recording of this training is $210, $65 in New York City. Trans people who are younger or lower income often can't afford this process or take a longer time changing official documents because the cost and time involved can be prohibitive for them. The message Parker received in this scenario is, the library is comfortable requiring you, a trans person, to spend money and time that most cisgender people do not in order to be recognized under your preferred name. If Parker cannot complete this lengthy process for any reason, they may not want to come to the library at all, since they run the risk of being identified by the wrong name and gender and have to explain and defend their identity. How could this microaggression have been avoided? The simple solution is to not have policies that require undue burden to be put upon trans patrons. Though a policy change to help one group of patrons is completely justified, in this case, changing this policy would help other patrons as well, such as those who want to change their name after marriage or divorce, which also involves fees, legal forms, and time. But we cannot change policy in a mere moment, and therefore might not be able to avoid this or similar microaggressions. Policy is what it is, and staff must follow it. But in this instance, the staff member could acknowledge that Parker is dealing with a frustrating situation, and let them know he's going to bring this particular issue up to his supervisor or library administration. He may not be able to help Parker at that moment, but he may be able to work on Parker's behalf for a resolution that is good for the whole community, while letting Parker know that staff members care about their experience in the library. Things we suggest library staff keep in mind when addressing the particular issue in this scenario. MHLS removed the gender identifier in Sierra in 2018. The Alt ID field in Sierra does not solve the issue of a preferred name that has not been changed legally. It is not a field libraries use because it does not print on any notices from Sierra. Alt IDs in Sierra are limited in effectiveness but do have some uses. Enhancement requests have been targeting this recently, and Innovative is aware of the issue according to their product manager. The alt ID can be displayed in the patron record as a flag to staff to address the patron as they would like to be, but the custom display has the downside of allowing only one column of patron data to display. The Northeast Millerton Library has taken this measure to ensure that staff use the appropriate name. It does not address pronouns. The alt ID cannot be used in many notices, but it can be used on hold shelf slips. Vega allows the patron to create a username that will be used within the platform. The name field and how it is used in Sierra is a local decision. At MHLS, we require that the name field is used and entered in a last name, first name, middle initial. This works with our system for indexing the patron on the last name and for notices. Administration may want to advise staff members helping patrons with a name change to inform patrons that documentation sent to their residences will reflect the updated name. We agree. The Sierra system will follow the same rules it does with any name. If a person is using a single name only, it would work. Resources. UCLA, recognizing microaggressions and the messages they send. Name changes. www.nycourts.gov. Further reading. So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijoma Oluo, specifically Oluo's discussion on microaggressions on pages 169 to 178, first edition, copyright 2018. Blind Spot, Hidden Biases of Good People by Mazarine R. Banaji and Anthony G. Greenwald. Microaggressions in Everyday Life, Race, Gender, and Sexual Orientation by Daryl Wing Su.